almost every 3 days. If you cannot make a regatta, please at least tell one of us 2 weeks in advance, because it is very difficult to try to replace someone. And for these bigger regattas, we will get penalized, even if we reach the maximum penalty points. We may not be able to compete in the following semester. So it's a very brutal system, and it's to make sure everyone's competing the entire time, and it's to make it a little bit more fair. Because if we were to drop a race, another school's going to be like, well, we could have brought another team. So please keep that rule in mind. If you do not show up for a regatta, you're most likely going to be like off the team, and you have to try out again for the next season. It's just really unfair for other people, so just keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to start through the chalk talk. Skippers, raise your hands. I want to know who's my skippers. Crews? You're both. Okay. All right, so we're going to be talking about starts and upwind strategies. Kevin and Dylan, please jump in if I'm going over something incorrectly, just because I'm not a skipper. So just keep that in mind. Here's pretty much our overview. So we have start strategies, strategies for upwind, scenarios, final advice, and some questions. If you have questions, please ask. And there's a lot of, and for this PowerPoint too, crew, please listen. It's so important that you understand the information here, because a skipper can qualify for the regatta, but it's going to be the crew that helps win the regatta. All right, so one of our first start strategies is parking on the line. The one thing you really have to keep in mind is if the venue has current. So HSA, as you guys know, has current. It's not insanely heavy, but it's really going to play a role in how you set up on the start line, how you park, what angle you're going to be at. So you always want to make sure when you are sitting on the line, figure out what direction the current's coming from. And even while you're racing, sometimes the current will switch. Dylan and I had the Embry-Riddle regatta, and the current switched halfway through a race, and we just clapped everyone because no one was paying attention to it. And a really good indicator for that is looking at the boats in the mooring field. The boats will point where the current is coming from as well. Then you got backwinding the main. It's a little bit more complex, but what you do, yes, Dylan?
The stern of the boats will point towards the current. Keep in mind if it's really windy, it'll point into the wind.
No, the boats do vector math of adding the wind and the current off of the bow.
If you see like if the wind's blowing one way and if it's blowing this way, the boat's facing this, then the current's probably like submarine.
Yeah. So it's just a lot of vector math. Backwinding the main, it's just really you push the boom out to sail backwards if you're above the start line. We'll go over that more out of practice. It's just a technique you can use when you're parking on the line. Then we have dip starting and line sag. That only really applies into fleets that are like 30 to 50 boats. I'm only mentioning it because sometimes you will get into those situations where, Brian, can you draw like a line sag? Sometimes if people are not really setting up on the start line correctly, you can find a hole or park above them, and you can kind of get away with that. It's not really common. The only time you'll ever really see this is in laser regattas, only because those fleets are really giant. Dip starting, I've never done that. So
line sag is where you have people who are setting up on the pin, and they're coming in later, and so they're setting up pretty close. You have people setting up on the committee boat side. They're coming in later. They're setting up pretty close. Then you have all the people who set up at the committee boat, like maybe a minute and a half before the start. So they've drifted a little bit, and so they're literally drifting towards the middle of the line and drifting away from it. Because unless the current is ripping you over the line onto course side, the wind is going to push you away from the line. So line sag is where the middle is literally like a bubble. And so it can mean that, say you're over here on the committee boat side, and you realize that everyone to leeward of you is caught in a line sag. That means that you can bear off, cover them, and get beautiful clear air off the middle of the line.
So don't worry too much about that in college racing. It's just one of those techniques if you ever happen to be in that situation where it is possible. The other one is poor tacking. So, Kevin, I see you smirking. I'm only telling you don't try this unless you're 110% sure, because half the time when you do try to poor tack the fleet and it doesn't work out, you're literally just screwed for the rest of the race. Unless it's like big brain calculated somehow and it works. The only other time you would do this as well, if there's a shift that no one else sees and that poor tack is going to work. The only time I've ever seen it work is Dylan pull it off nicely, because literally no one else saw the shift that was going to happen. So don't poor tack unless you really know it's going to work. Usually all boats start on a starboard tack and cross the start line on a starboard tack.
Brandon might have done that.
No, you didn't.
Someone-
Well, you guys were in the same division.
Someone did it this weekend. I think it was Brandon.
I've had very successful port tack starts. What usually is the better option is to start on starboard tack, literally get your boat fully across the line, and then tack onto port. Because it makes sure that one, you have right of way while you clear the line, so you don't literally like foul someone going over the line, and that gets really messy because then there's a bunch of other boats that you're going to start fouling. And two, it usually means that you're going to get much clearer air because you're not going to have to sail through the fleet. So you can port tack for the start, but as it says, only if you're 110% sure that it is the absolute best option.
I just want to add, you only do this if there is a huge left ship.
Yeah.
Sure.
So say the wind course is set with the wind perfectly square. Suddenly, it's just like all the way over here, and you're sailing to the windward mark on one tack. It's happened. If you're going slow enough that race committee sees what's happening, in college sailing, technically they will call the race and reset the course. You're supposed to have to tack once. It's not always done, but that's technically the rule. So either if you know that you can make it on one tack somewhere in between to throw them off. Legitimately, if you see that no one else sees the shift and you do, throw in an extra tack. You've technically completed the requirements for the rules. They don't have that no one tacked. They don't have the rule to fall back on saying that no one tacked to get to the mark. So that's one way that you can kind of play the rules. They'll probably still call the race if it's really obvious, though.
Right. So the next part, this was what Mitchell was really emphasizing last practice. Anticipate where boats might be setting up. That's really that's probably the biggest part about your start strategy. Trying to anticipate where boats might be setting up. You don't want people to shut you out, and you want to be shutting other people out. So just try to guess where people are kind of setting up. If you see people setting up on the start line early, you probably make the assumption, hey, they're probably not going to make it. They're setting up too early. They're probably going to float down all the way to the pin and not actually make it to the start. Or, hey, I see that this boat's above me. I can probably push them, call leeward on them, push them over the line, and now I have an advantage. So just try to anticipate where these boats might be with the current and what the wind's doing. And then crew, I cannot emphasize this enough. Feed your skipper information. If you want to be liked by your skipper, you need to tell them what's going on at all times. Like Dylan, hey, there's a boat leeward of us. Hey, I see this one tacking. It might try to shut us out. Hey, can we push this boat? Can we call leeward on them, push them over? Hey, I see this hole down the line. Maybe that has more clean air than where we're at currently. Always tell your skipper what's going on. You can see more than they can. They're too busy trying to make sure they don't crash into anyone. You don't have to worry about that. All you need to worry about is where boats are, what other people are doing, and what you think the best strategy is while you're setting up. Because what they're nervous about is making sure they're coming in with full speed, crossing the start line at 0. Yeah, and this is another thing, crew. Don't be afraid to tell your skipper if you know what they're doing is not the best idea and you have a better idea. There's nothing wrong with that. The worst case scenario is all they're going to tell you is like, no, I don't agree with that because this is going to be the better situation because X, Y, Z. So skipper, if you're going to tell your crew no, at least tell them why so that they are not feeling like stupid or anything. Always tell them why. That's what Mitchell and Dylan always tells me. They're like, no, because X, Y, Z. I'm like, great, now I understand if I'm ever in this situation again. And the biggest thing is do your pre-start homework. This is, with regattas, maybe 75% of the race really starts at that start line. If you don't get clean air, don't anticipate where boats might be, you're really just going to get screwed when you get halfway up the course. So what is pre-start homework? So why is it important? Because one, your crew manages 50% of those tactics. They can see more outside the boat. They can hear more. They're doing a whole lot more than what the skipper's doing. What your skipper should be doing is making sure those telltales are flying straight back. They're catching all the lips, and that boat is flat as possible. You need to make sure you're not giving your skippers too much work. Otherwise, it's too much of a burden, and then they're not going to be able to make that race a really good race. I do recommend all crew to get a watch. We have the 3-minute sequence. When you count down time for your skipper, it allows for more precise tactics and a cleaner and easier start. So with Dylan, usually with the start sequence, you'll hear 3, 2, 131. I'll tell him time in between, like, hey, it's 110, or hey, 45 seconds left, hey, 12 seconds left, because sometimes that's going to help them count down or figure out how fast I need to be moving to set up on the start line. Highly, 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 highly recommended countdown watch. $10 on Amazon. I will buy you one if you're like that broke. It's going to really make the difference between a JV crew and a varsity crew. So what are the components of the pre-start homework? So kind of like we went back to, how strong is the current? Where is it going? Where's the current the strongest? Jacksonville University, it's a shipping channel. In the center of it, it's deeper water. It's going to move a lot faster. That's going to play a big role on how far you're going to drift. And then when you get closer to shore, the current's not going to be as strong. So how's that going to play a role in your upwind tactics?
So just to add to how dramatic Jacksonville is, it's like
you can sail backwards.
So they launch from the shore just like we do. So it's the same depth as what we're used to. But by the time you get to the channel, it's about 40 feet deep. So think about how strong the current is for us compared to when you launch versus when you're in the channel. And now think about how much more water is moving through by adding another 25 feet to that.
So now another thing is which side of the course has more wind. That's going to be the biggest role in how you do your tactics. At Rollins, we noticed that the left side of the course tended to have more wind. Kevin, when he came back, he's like, hey, left side of course, that's the way to go. And Dylan's like, awesome, I'll make sure I will set up. He said, now I know where I should set up on the start line in order to get that good breeze on the left side of the course. So always pick the side that has obviously more wind, because more wind means more boat speed. Which tack is more favorable, port or starboard? The only reason I'm mentioning that is because in certain situations where you can port tack the fleet, because of a big wind shift like that, maybe you do want to consider a port tack, because you would obviously get the advantage. So the best way to check that is you kind of shoot the line, which means you go to close all. You see how far up am I pointing versus on a port tack or a starboard tack. That's also going to play a role in when I'm going to tack on the course and where I should be tacking. And then where am I going to... Oh, there's a ladybird on. Okay, so should I start boat, pin, or middle? So the reason why we have boat, pin, and middle is because sometimes the current's going to play a big role, wind speed, things like that. At least at the tournament, we kind of set up towards the middle, because once we got kind of to the left side, then we had fleet control, and then we were able to just shit on everyone by giving them dirty air once we went onto a port tack.
You'll notice that most regattas, because most of the time the boat will always be favored. Something I always do, I actually like to practice because I've seen you do it.
Hey, you better show up.
Middle of the line, you almost always want to start middle towards one side. You don't want to start, I mean, yes, if you're the only boat there, starting on one end is going to be better. But there's a bunch of boats there, you want to get in the middle of the line because then you're going to have all that clean air. And even what I was doing at Rollins, this is a light wind thing. You start at the middle of the line, and in that 10 seconds get under full power sailing towards the pin, and you want to time it so right when the race starts, you get to the pin, just head up. Then you're below everyone, but you're going faster than them, so you can just slowly come up with them, pinch all of them off. They'll lose all their speed, you can tack over, and you're fucked off. It's a weird concept to understand, but we'll see.
Yeah, so I kind of drew it over here. The way I like to do is I like to break the start line up into thirds. That's the easiest way I am able to envision it as a crew. Sometimes I'll tell Dylan, hey, do we want to start the third closest to the boat? Because sometimes starting boat is not always the best idea. You'll see in certain situations the more you race. The next one, this is probably what varsity does the most, is the wind oscillating, and you want to kind of time how long these oscillations last. So what do I mean by oscillation? That means the wind will be heavy for 5 minutes, and then it'll lighten up for another 5 minutes. And sometimes there will be shifts. So sometimes if heavy wind comes through, it's going to be slightly left. And then when it comes back to 10 knots, maybe it'll just be square with the course. So that's why it's very important. What Dylan and I will do, we just kind of sit there, wait for the wind to oscillate. We're like, hey, heavy wind is last maybe around 3 minutes and it's a lefty. So when we're going up the course, we're like, hey, it's like past 5 minutes. That lefty's gonna come back through. We'll tap and we'll be perfect on lay line. It's a little bit hard to like envision, but like we'll be pairing JV with varsity, so you guys can kind of grasp that concept a little more. It's very, very important at your college. That venue has a lot of shifts, and so does our venue as well.
It can also be very crucial on lakes. I think the most dramatic improvement by playing wind oscillations that I've ever seen was at a regatta at Lake Dora last year. So it was a 6-boat fleet. 5 of us went down the middle of the course trying to play the shifts by just sticking to the middle. Dr. Herbster went literally a quarter of a mile off to the right, but played the shifts right and came second to the mark. So playing the oscillations can mean that you're suddenly gone from the fleet and come to the mark first, or he then tried to play it the same way the next race, dead last to the mark. Every other person got there before him.
It's a lot of this, like, when we would have high school regattas, like in the little inland lakes in Wisconsin, it's really, all of this is caused because of trees and everything, just kind of like objects in the way of the wind. So it just kind of like cause the wind to be very predictable. It'll kind of flow around. These are called geographic shifts. I see this a lot, like if you're going along shoreline, the wind will kind of follow with it. So it's really important to pay attention to your surroundings, like trees and houses and everything, because they will affect the wind a lot. A big thing in Chicago, and even like the SailGP sailors were struggling with this, is that the wind, when it comes out of the west, it'll line up with all the streets that are running east and west and flow through the buildings. And it was kind of creating like channels of wind, and they were sailing north and south because of this. And it was really complicated, and like they were asking me like, how the hell do you do this? And as it's different each time, but like pay attention to the trees and buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like our venue. If the wind's coming out of the north, the mooring field is going to really cause a lot of shifts and bigger puffs, because obviously those boats are sitting right on top of the course. So of course, and when they swing around too, it's like boom, psych! You thought the ship was going to be here, now it is. So that's why we're telling you, try to time the oscillations. If you can't, that's okay. That's when it's going to come down to timing down the puffs for your skipper, which is how long are the puffs. So what I do for Dylan, I'm like, hey, I see this puff coming across the course. I'm counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and when I count that down, that allows him to immediately head the boat up if it's lift, header, whatever. It gives him time to anticipate what the wind's going to do, and then we're maximizing our boat speed. Because one time with Katie, I didn't call down a puff and we auto tacked. And if I had saw it sooner and counted it down soon enough, we could have tacked and get lifted to the mark. So every time you see a puff, count it down for your skipper. Sometimes if that puff's like 20 knots, I'm going to say, hey, I see that's a big puff. I'm going to ease prematurely to maintain boat speed so that we're not heeling over too much and losing more boat speed.
Real quick, by show of hands, who knows how to tell when there's a puff? I guess in 2 situations, one when there's other boats near you and one when there's not. So show of hands, who knows how to tell a puff when there's other boats near you? Yeah. Yeah.
Raise your hands high. I don't know who this is. High. Okay.
Yeah. So when there's other boats near you, you can usually see that, okay, they're having to start to hike a little bit, or whoa, they're heading down a lot. Like, be prepared for that, and you can play off of that and hopefully be able to come out ahead of them because you were able to flatten the boat faster. You were ready to tack before they were. So that's when you're in the fleet and there's puffs hitting and if there's boats ahead of you, that it's easier. When you are by yourself, so when you're leading the fleet, or you're off on some other part of the course than the rest of the fleet, the dark patches in the water are the puffs. The darker the patch, the stronger the wind. That's roughly the correlation. Yeah. So if you're sailing along and you see a really dark patch, you need to be talking to your skipper and going, hey, in 10 seconds, we are going to have to be hiking. Be prepared, be ready to tack. So keep an eye on those dark patches in front of you. It's how you can kind of navigate the course of, okay, there's a patch to our port side. We should tack to get to that patch because there's nothing in front of us. So keeping an eye on these puffs is crucial to sailing as fast as you can.
All right, so I have some additional advice. The biggest thing is don't bang the corner. So that's just kind of some slang. That kind of just means don't sail to Narnia, like all the way out here. And you're like, okay, now I can make the ley line. Now I'm going to come back. Because that probably means you're going to be the last boat. You do that?
Yeah, it works sometimes.
Sometimes. I prefer you guys don't bang the corners.
Yeah, it works. Don't do that.
Don't do that unless you're very experienced. So that just means don't sail to no man's land and then decide to come back into the race.
The only person I've ever known who can reliably bang a corner is Dave Dunn, who sails at HSA. He is one of the reasons HSA was founded. So he's been sailing in this area for like over 50 years. He knows the current and the wind, so he knows when to tack. He's the only person I've ever known who can reliably bang a corner, but he can only do it at HSA.
So if you're not sure if you're banging a corner or not, the best indication is like, are you actually sailing away from the mark now? That's usually a good time to tack and sail back to the windward mark. And the biggest thing, when you're on the race course, you guys gotta communicate the entire time. Your mouth should be dry at the end of the race. Sometimes the wind will change, the shifts will change, the current will change. So you gotta be actively changing your plans while on the race course. And then the other big thing too is don't follow other boats. You'll never win being in someone else's shadow. Katie tried doing this to Mitchell, and that's why she always came in second or third versus first. If you're literally behind someone, you will always be in their dirty air, and you'll just never win. In this situation, it's just best to tack away and then sail in your own clean air. I'd rather be last in clean air than be fifth place in all that dirty air. It's just not worth it.
This is just for upwind.
Yeah, just for upwinds. That's why it's upwind sailing.
Oh, is it something upwind sailing?
Yeah, it's upwind sailing only. Yep, kind of going back to your your plan may change. Just actively change it. So some other things too. Never sit in someone's dirty air. What are you laughing at?
It's upwind sailing, so.
Yeah, now it's more upwind sailing. Like I said, always tack out of dirty air. If you're on the start line and you're starting second row, which means behind other boats, once you cross the start line, tack away. It's just not worth sitting in that dirty air. And usually at that point, you'll just get farther and farther and farther behind. Also, pick one side of the course to stick to with more wind versus attack. The only reason I'm saying that is because with more wind, you're just going to move a lot faster. Sometimes you won't be on the most favorite tack, but you'll have the advantage of moving a lot faster on the water. Also, stay in phase with those oscillating shifts. What Dylan and I ended up doing at the tournament is, we ended up tacking a lot, but even though we stayed in phase with the oscillations, we ended up making it to the mark a little bit faster than some people who were tacking less. Yes, tacking and jibing causes your boat's speed to come down a little bit if you do it wrong, but as long as you stay in those phases, you'll always be on a lift and end up to sailing a lot less distance.
So, real quick, who knows what VMG is? So VMG is velocity made good. It's really just used in sailing, and it's used to determine basically how fast you're getting to the mark. So we use boat speed, and it's great. You can be going 10 knots, but on a beam reach, your VMG is 0. In fact, it might be negative because you're sailing away from the mark.
It's basically your vector to the mark.
So yeah, VMG is your velocity vector to the mark.
Yes, it's V cosine theta.
Yep. So it's better to sail towards the mark on a slower tack than it is to sail really far away from the mark, but way faster. Of course, there's times where you can like kind of make the trade-off of I'm sailing so much faster by sailing slightly farther away from the mark that it makes up for my VMG, but VMG is king in upwind sailing.
Yeah, so the other thing, this kind of depends on the wind speed. Feather in the puff. So if it's like 20 knots out and we're competing at like Jacksonville University, it's like 20 knots. You want to be feathering, so that kind of goes back to the telltales that we had last practice. Your telltales will be flying up. That also depowers the boat, because if you're heeling over too much, you're losing a lot of boat speed, and then you start to drift, so you're sailing a lot extra distance. And then let's say you get caught in a lull and you're losing boat speed, you want a foot, so that means you'll head down ever so slightly, ease the jib just a hair to create a deeper belly in the sail to power up the boat, and then you'll go back to having your telltales parallel once you've gained enough boat speed. Yep, so the biggest thing for crew as well is you don't want to be easing or trimming the sails too much. They should only be millimeters or centimeters at most. If you do exaggerated movements, you will end up capsizing, or usually that's what ends up happening. You'll end up capsizing or lose a lot of your boat speed. So if Dylan and I are hiking really, really hard in like 25 knots, if I ease out the jib like a foot, we're going to capsize to windward because we're already hiking. So what I'm going to tell Dylan is like, hey, I'm going to ease, and I'm going to ease out like 5 millimeters. If we're still heeling over too much, I'm going to start easing out maybe like an inch or something. So you always want to be communicating to your skipper when you're trimming and when you're easing. And for upwind sailing, when Dylan tells me, hey, Sheeden, I'm going to pull in like maybe 2 millimeters. If I over trim, you're just going to stall out the sails and you're going to lose boat speed as well. Yep, make sure your telltales are flying straight back in a good windy day. If you need to pinch in those puffs because those puffs are really strong, you can feather for them. If you get stuck in a lull, you can slowly foot for them as well. And with the FJ, it's really interesting. It's not like the 420. The FJs, you can kind of get away with pinching a little bit. If Dylan, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so pinching is basically, if you guys are sailing like close haul, obviously you're as close to the wind as you can get, like while you're still sailing with your telltales flying back. But if you're pinching, your windward, you're basically heading up like half a degree to a degree up further into the wind. It's somewhere around there, like a very minuscule amount, not like 10 degrees or whatever. And what you're doing is you're sacrificing a bit of flow and power over the sails, but you're making more gains upwind, and it's very advantageous. Like if it's just too windy and you're full height, like you can't do anything to keep the boat flat. You can pinch a little bit. You'll keep the boat flat. You'll still go pretty much the same speed, and you'll point further up. So it's really useful in like heavy wind. You never want to pinch in light wind, and you never want to pinch in waves. And the way that you know you're pinching is like what Naomi said, when your windward telltale is flying up, like when it's disturbed. It's not streamlined, nice, straight back. And it's your windward one. Now, if you're footing, which is the opposite of pinching, that's when you're too low, your leeward telltale will be flying back.
So pinching.
Or it won't be flying back.
This is nice, flying perfectly back, and this is when you're too low. So your boat needs to head up a bit to close haul. This one you can get away with it because of the way the FJ is designed, and it's also going to matter where your jib car settings is, but we're going to go over that in the next slide or two. Actually, psych, it's right here. So for jib car setting, this is so important because the FJ, the gas pedal to that boat is the jib. I know 420 sailors, the gas pedal is typically the main sail, but the FJ is designed kind of being a little bit backwards. So for light wind, if it's like 0 to 5 knots, I typically have 4 holes showing. Creates a deeper belly, allows you to power up the boat a little bit easier. In medium wind, this is kind of where we have all the jib car settings on our fleet currently, is 3 holes showing. That's kind of the standard setting. And if it's like heavy wind, like really should be like 20 knots or more, you kind of want 2 holes showing. That's because we're going to depower the jib so that you're not heeling over too much and then you're not losing too much boat speed.
So you specify like 4, so light wind,
Yeah.
4 holes to the back.
Yeah, so if this right here is our track, this is bow, stern right here. This would be for like medium wind, which is regular. Right here is light, and then heavy wind we'll have right here.
So yeah, it's the holes towards the stern that are showing.
Another thing to note, this depends on the manufacturer of the boat. So if you go to a regatta that is not at Embry Riddle, Google it. Literally, like just look up the tuning guide for like a Zim FJ, let's say, or like the Vanguard FJ. It'll be different for each boat, just depending on the race.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so other things too is if you feel slow, like you're gonna notice the more you sail and more practice. If you feel slow, that probably means you need to adjust your control lines. That might mean you don't have enough of something or you have too much of something. So in light wind, if you feel like you're moving slow, maybe you have too much bang, maybe you have too much outhaul. You want to be constantly adjusting those control lines. It's not a set it once and then leave it alone. You're always moving those. So if our outhaul, if it's light wind, you want less outhaul on your mainsail. You want a deeper belly in the sail. In heavy wind, you want that thing cinched because you need to prepare to die. Vang and heavy wind, you want more vang so your skipper doesn't have a hard time keeping the mainsail inside the boat. Downhaul, the downhaul comes in a big play in heavy wind where you really try to stretch these sails so that you can depower your mainsail so you're not going to be overpowered and heeling over the entire time. More upwind sailing. So when sailing upwind, the biggest things is don't over trim your sails. This will only slow you down. So if you just like fully sheet in that jib, all you're going to do is lose boat speed because now you've created a wall and you literally played yourself. You're not having that belly in the jib to actually power up the boat. Flat is fast. Every time you heel to windward, you lose so much boat speed. Flat boat is faster. It's okay if you have like 1 to 2 degrees of heel because of the FJ, but flat is fast. If you overheel, you're just going to lose so much. And also let your skipper know if they're pinching. Sometimes skippers don't realize that they're pinching because they're so focused on what other boats are doing on the course. I would be like, Sergio, hey, you're pinching way too much. He's like, oh, my bad. I'm going to head down a little bit and we get more boat speed. When boats meet. So always tell your skipper if you're going to be able to cross or duck. So what does crossing and ducking mean? So a big thing that I heard that Kevin had a problem with is his crew wouldn't tell them. So if you're the port boat and so you're coming to me to start a boat, I'm going to be like, hey, Kevin, I really don't think we could cross this boat. Crossing means you can go in front of them and ducking means you go below them. I'd be like, Kevin, I really don't think we can cross them. He's like, okay, we're going to duck and then we just go underneath them. Or, hey, Kevin, I really think if we maintain our boat speed, we can cross them and then we'll just cross them. And be confident in your answer. If you hesitate, 50% of the time you're going to cause a collision or lose a lot of boat lengths. So be confident in your decision. If you're really, really, really unsure, just tell your skipper to duck. You'd rather be safe than sorry. Kind of falls into the rules of sailing, avoid collisions, and also you're in a port starboard situation as well.
If you did have a collision, what would be a fault there? Would be the one who didn't duck.
Port boat.
Port.
Always.
Port boat's one making the decision for duck.
Yeah, it's only so if you're the red boat, you also need to make sure you maintain your course. Because if this port boat's gonna duck you and you're like, oh, I don't think they're gonna duck or cross, and you head down, then the starboard boat's at fault. So let's say
if you can tell that they're not getting out of the way, then you avoid the collision.
Yeah. So like if this is you, Zach, and I'm with Kevin, and you're not changing your course, I'm gonna say starboard, and if you don't tack in that very instance, I'm gonna tell Kevin, just tack right away, and we're just gonna protest you.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Also, when you're ducking and it's really heavy wind, be careful. Don't normally when you're ducking, you're trying to stay as close to the boat as possible, but not changing your course as much. When it's heavy wind, take like another foot or two because sometimes you get a puff and you'll get rounded up and you'll just slam the boat. It's happening more.
The other option is to foot your main as you're ducking and trim in as you're coming across their stern, and that keeps you from rounding up if there's a puff.
And the other thing too is be consistent with your tacks and jibes. It's okay to not have a perfect tack or jibe every time. What matters more is you're just kind of nailing the consistency. If you're able to maintain that roll, that amount of heel for your tacks, that's perfectly fine. The reason why we go over tacks and jibes a lot is so that they become muscle memory. And so if you do end up having a really bad tack, at least it's not going to be your worst one on the course. Yep. So the biggest thing for attacks and jibes, crew, let your skipper know if they move across the boat too soon. This really causes like oversteering, kind of slightly stalls the sails. Skipper, if your crew, let your crew know if they overtrim the sails. I have a bad habit of overtrimming the sails for attacks. Usually, what that does is slows down the boat. Dylan will tell me after every attack, like, "Hey, you overtrimmed the sails." Like, okay, sorry, I'll slow it down a little bit for the next attack. You guys want to be actively teaching each other, letting each other know what mistakes you're making while you're racing too. This is only really at the windward and offset. I didn't really want to include it, but I'm just going to go over it really quick. Crew, when you are at the windward and offset, what's very important is you're going to be beam reaching temporarily. Your jib should have their tails parallel with the water, so that means you're going to ease them out slightly, because what this really should be for you is a speed up. It's kind of like Mario Kart when you hit that mushroom. You're going to gain speed right here. I am serious. Beam reaching is a lot faster than close haul.
It also means that you're going faster. You need to be even more vigilant. I don't know how many times, and I'm sure Naomi has had similar occasions where you're coming, you round the mark, you get onto your beam reach, you're accelerating towards the offset, and suddenly there's someone doing their circles right next to the offset. And so now you have to avoid them and protest them for getting in your way. So crew, you have to be really observant of if there's boats in front of you as you're speeding up, because you're losing reaction time because you're going faster.
Now this kind of goes into Rule 18. If you're not familiar with mark room, that's okay. We have another presentation for that. If you maintain overlap at the windward mark, if you're this boat, scream mark room. That lets them know that you're entitled to your room rounding the windward mark. So usually I say that just because it avoids problems. The last thing you want to do after a hard day of racing is be in the protest room. No one wants to do it. It's just very time consuming. So if you're the red boat and there's no overlap established, what I like to do is tell Dylan, like, hey, there's no overlap. He'll be like, no overlap, you have no room. So that means they can't like bullshit their way into like causing a collision or try to get room that they're not entitled to. So yeah, literally they try to pull it off this weekend. And then prepare to jibe or go wide when you round the offset. So once you run the windward mark, immediately talk to your skipper or crew what your strategy is right here. It's very important you come up with it now, because you don't want to be here and you're like, well, I don't know what to do. And then all these boats that do have a plan come in and then just roll you, and then you lose a lot of boat speed.
You only have 2 to 3 boat lengths to make your call.
So what that also includes is your control lines, where the wind is on the course, what other boats are doing, and most importantly, what these wind shadows will be when these other boats are crossing from windward to offset. Sometimes you don't want to jibe immediately because now you put yourself in a lot of turbulent and dirty air. So maybe it's best to go out wide a little bit, and then once these boats are done coming across, you can then maybe jibe, come back to wherever the wind is on the course. Sometimes when I round the windward off mark, I'm like, Dylan, I see a lot of wind, course right. He's like, cool. Now I know whether I'm going to jibe or just go out wide after we round the offset. We're going to do one scenario. If you don't have experience, find someone else who does, and I want you guys to discuss this scenario. Get up and mingle.
That's exactly this.
Yeah, because so they actually deserve tax.
Yeah.
So they do loses.
I only hear Zach talking. I should really hear more talking. Huh?
3 boat
I
lengths.
see 3 for team races too.
Yes.
Does that apply to the two boat team racing?
It's all team racing.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
And then match racing has other.
I don't even know the rules to match racing.
They have their own section.
Is match racing?
It's one-on-one.
Oh, really?
It's the only time that you should be sailing in someone's swing shadows because you'll have a tackle battle
Because
the
when
entire way up the
words
course.
practice
Yeah.
later,
Doesn't matter how slow you're going as long as you're mirroring what the other people are
Do you guys have an answer?
you say it's starboard.
You say starboard?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Which SB?
Yeah.
Does someone agree or disagree? Mm-hmm. Zach. All right. Anyone else? I want to hear someone else's answer. Sebastian, you guys have an answer back there?
I mean, yes, in this scenario that it's PA's fault because I don't see like clear overtaking going on. I don't see like any marker, like you said earlier.
SB isn't entitled to the marker. Yeah, so, like if you look at the position of SB2 and PA2,
It's like
Who's ready to see the answer? I feel like you guys
I would say
are mixed on this.
I think that PA2 is at full because they're already in the zone, so markroom is established around the zone, and then PA tapped while inside the zone, and people lost all of the rights.
Dylan?
Reading.
Okay. All right. So, who's ready to see the answer?
We're ready.
it makes sense why we were.
You guys need to memorize your rules. If you're not familiar with Rule 18, that's okay. Our next shop talk is going to be about Rule 18 just because it's very dense and very complicated. Do you guys agree or disagree with the answer? Is it confusing to anyone? Who?
This is what you're saying.
I think in college, like at a regular protest room in college, I think PA would get thrown out.
Yeah,
I-
agree with you.
I
In
don't know if they
college
would
setting.
get. I don't know if they would get thrown out. They would certainly get a penalty.
A DSQ probably.
They
Actually.
would. They would.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
They would
DSQ.
either get. They would either get a DSQ or they'd get like a 20% penalty added to their finish
Well,
because
if they protested, then they would probably just throw out the protest. But
they. So I think it comes down to in college sailing. It would come down to did any other penalties come off of this event happening? Because it's not just going to be two boats at the mark. If PA then fouled someone because they were heading up, then they would probably get a DSQ because they did literally almost everything wrong in this situation.
no, if this, yeah,
If this is one of those things where like this is first and second, and they finish with SB in front of PA, and PA takes the protest to the protest hearing, and the committee feels that I don't know, like an example needs to be made, then PA would probably get like a plus 20% penalty to their score, but it's not it's not the worst scenario that can happen.
So basically, SB didn't.
They just stayed their course. They
didn't have to.
No.
No, we'll go over mark room next Monday just because it's pretty complicated. So if you don't understand it now, that's perfectly okay. It took me a while to understand mark room as well.
Well, yeah, because the outside boat has to should like have to be inside the attack. Is that what you're saying?
It actually becomes windward lowered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this. I mean, this still would. If you go back to the drawing, I think this still would have been. And never mind. Just looking at the positions.
Yeah, well, PA, the pictures are going to show it. PA said PA had a luff whenever, like, so I did, where I tried to head out to work, then I headed up and had a luff.
Yeah, and that's entirely on them.
Yeah.
There's
I mean, they tax.
This is-
tax just-
This starts at venturing into Rule 14 and proper course, and that's like a 2-lecture minimum rule.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna just jump to most important advice, just because it's already like 7. You guys can look at the scenarios. We'll post them in the whatever channel it is on Slack, and I want you guys to actually look at the scenarios. I bought the quiz book with my own money so that we can teach you guys, because sometimes you'll end up in these situations, and it's really good to know your rules ahead of time. Be like, well, I know what rules already apply because I already know what the situation is going to come down to. And the reason why these scenarios are in this book already is because they tend to happen the most. So with the Florida Tech, they study these scenarios too, and that's usually why they always win their protests. There's only one instance I know that they've lost to a protest. So the biggest important advice I can give, and what Mitchell also told me to tell you guys, is everyone has their own unique formula to starting and strategizing Upwind. Like Dylan and Mitchell's strategies are actually totally different. Like they're just very, very different. They have their own method. They have their own way of doing their pre-start homework. So you can't always just take someone else's formula to starting because it might not work for you. Like when I said with Dylan or Kevin, like they're two totally different people. The way they think is very different. They come with different experience, different backgrounds, especially where they grew up sailing.
I don't think a single skipper on the team has the same pre-start methods.
No, I've crewed for almost every skipper on the varsity team, and everyone has their own unique way of sailing. Like when I jibe, Dylan doesn't mind me grabbing the bank to power up it a little bit more. Versus Brandon, he's like, don't fucking touch my bank. So everyone is very, very, very different. And it's very good to communicate to your crew, like, hey, this is what I need out of you if you're going to crew for me. Or sometimes I would say, like, oh, Brian, like, what do you need me to do? This is how, like, Dylan likes me to sail a boat. How do you want me to sail a boat? And he'll tell me. So always let your crew know what you want. And skipper, always tell your crew what you want. And crew, always tell your skipper what you want. Sometimes I'm like, oh, Dylan, like, just slow down the tack. Like, wait for me to cross the boat. We'll get a better tack out of it. Or, hey, like, can you flatten a little bit more on the jibe? Because, like, I need to be hanging it off the side of the boat while you need to be flattening the boat. So it's very important that you guys help teach each other and help grow. Because yes, we don't have a coach, but there's other club teams who do very, very amazing in our conference. A good example is FSU. They went to nationals actually, and they're a club team just like us. So it's very important that you guys talk to each other, help each other improve. Because there's only so much I can teach Brian and Mitchell and Dylan. We're not that much older. We don't have that much more experience. So all we can do is every time I find new information, I immediately tell you guys. So that's the best we can do. And crew, I cannot emphasize this enough. Your skipper needs you a lot. If you're going to crewing is usually a little bit harder than skippering. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot more work. It's a lot more mental work. It's a lot more physical work. Your skipper really, 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 really needs you to feed that information to them. Without it, they can only do so much on that race course. And usually, the reason why some boats are usually at the back half of the course is because their crew is silent. If you're silent, your skipper's not going to want you to compete with them at all. The way I do my regattas is I pick the skippers and I let the skippers pick the crew. Because I want them to feel comfortable in winning a regatta and relying on someone that they know will feed them the information they need in order to win. So like I said, the skipper can get the boat to the regatta, but it's going to be the crew that helps win the regatta. It is a team sport. You and your partner in the boat is what's going to allow you to win. If you don't have that communication, if your mouth is not dry at the end of that race or at the end of the day, you're not doing something right. You're really not. And crew, you're never just sitting in one spot. You're moving around the entire time. You're moving around, squatting, hiking, everything, touching control lines, talking the entire time. And that's what your skipper really, 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 really needs from you. That's what makes the difference from JV, developmental, and varsity. If you want to make that achieve that varsity level, which is what we all want for you guys, you gotta talk. That's the biggest requirement for our crew. You gotta talk the entire time. And I do ask skippers like, hey, did Dom talk enough for you today? And Kevin's like, no, he did not. I'm like, all right, Dom, we'll sit you down, and this is how you're going to crew correctly. That's pretty much the bulk of upwind sailing. Here's some safe venue tips.
So I have one more start-related thing real quick. So I've heard many times that the start of the race is the most important part. I hate that saying because that means that people will just run starts for practices all the time. Starting is absolutely important. You can lose a race at a start, but you cannot win it. you can get really good position off a start, but in order to win a race, you have to have a good start and have solid upwind tactics. If you don't know what you're doing upwind, you're going to be in the back of the fleet before you get halfway up the course. So starting is important. You can lose a race at the start, but you can also lose a race because you don't know what you're doing upwind. Even if you are literally the first one over the line by a minute, if you don't know how to tack and plan upwind, you're going to be the last one to the windward mark. So it's really important. It's important to know how to start so that you can do well and get to that position where then your upwind strategy you're able to play to what you want to do. If you're in the back of the fleet, it's a lot harder to play to what strategy you were planning to do.
Does anyone have any general questions about upwind sailing? We'll post this on here. I will let you guys look through the SASA venue tips just because it's a lot of info. So if you're competing at your designated regatta that you just signed up for, I recommend you look at some of these. I've competed at all these venues, and knowing these ahead of time is really going to give you the advantage to plan and strategize a lot easier on the water, because usually the host is supposed to be the one that does the best at the regatta. Like, the first time we hosted at Embry-Riddle, Dylan and I won our division because that's expected to. We know the area well. We know what's going to happen. We already know what to anticipate. So please look through these. I put a lot of information. The biggest one is Rollins College. Clear your rudder and centerboard of grass. If you don't, you're going to be the slowest boat out there. I'm serious. It sucks. Miami. Yes, watch out for the 29ers because they just zoom everywhere and they're kind of annoying. Here's USF. And then NC State, the women's team is going to go. So we're going to scout that out for you guys, figure out what's up with North Carolina, and then we'll be able to bring back that information. So please look through those. That's pretty much the end of the presentation. I know it was a little bit long, but the reason why we have these chalk talks is because I cannot spend this amount of time at HSA and then not have enough time on the water. So if you have any questions, please DM me, Brian, or Dylan. We have a lot of experience. I'm more than willing to sit down with you and talk about sailing for however long you want me to. There's been times where Katie just comes to my room and I talk to her how to cook for 3 hours. Like, I really don't mind doing that. The biggest goal and mission of our team is if you really want to do well and be the best sailor out there, we'll do everything in our power to make you the best out there. So yeah, so that's pretty much the end of it. If you have any questions or anything, regattas, just let me know. Otherwise, I will see you guys at practice on Wednesday. Same time.